Hi, everyone. It's Carolyn Moore from the Modern Widows Club, and we have a special treat for you. This 2020 Widow Empowerment event virtual. This is one of the pre-recorded videos that is a bonus for you. And we have a special speaker today with me, and I'm very happy to have Dr. Stephen Southwick. We are going to be talking about lessons on resilience and social connectedness. Now, Dr. Southwick, I'm going to just say hi to you, but I'm going to read a little bit about your bio, but thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Yeah, thank you. So here is a little bit of Dr. Southwick's credibility and experience. He's received his MD from George Washington Medical School. He completed his psychiatry residency at Yale University School of Medicine. He is the Glenn Greenberg Professor of Psychiatry, PTSD, and Resilience at Yale University Medical School and Yale Child Study Center. He's also the Adjunct Professor of Psychiatry at Mount Sinai School of Medicine. He doesn't have it on his resume, but he has been helping a lot over there with the COVID crisis. His interests include psychology, neurobiology of psychological trauma, PTS, and resilience to stress. He is also the author of one of my favorite books that almost everyone in this community hears me talking about constantly because it's invaluable. And it's called Resilience, the Science of Mastering Life's Greatest Challenges. I met Dr. Southwick in a very strange way because we were both featured in 2015 in a Wall Street Journal article that we both were featured in. His work and Modern Widows Club as an example of a resilience building organization. And so I was really grateful that the reporter actually saw that connection and put us together. And you're also on the advisory council at Modern Widows Club, and you help us create programs that does build resilience components into everything that we do. So I want to thank you for that because it makes truly a difference. So my first question for you is, well, what is resilience?
Well, again, thank you very much. And you're absolutely right. The Modern Widows Club is an exemplary example of a resilience building organization. It truly is. And resilience is essentially the ability to bend but not break, to bounce back, and sometimes even to grow in the face of adversity, tragedy, so forth. And I think it's important to understand that we can be resilient in some domains of our life, but not necessarily all domains of our life. So we might be resilient in our work life, but not so much in our personal family life. That doesn't mean we can't build it. Mm-hmm. And also we may be more resilient at some phases of our life compared to other phases. But again, we can always work on it. One other thing I wanted to say about resilience is that we talk about individual resilience. How resilient am I? Mm-hmm. But we'll talk about a number of characteristics or factors that can be learned to enhance your resilience. But it's also important to understand resilience takes place in a context. So I'm living in a family. I'm living I'm working in an organization. I'm living in a community, in a society, in a culture, so forth. Each of which may be more or less resilient in their own right and more or less capable of helping me with my resilience. The other thing is that when we talk about individual factors of resilience, it's also important to understand the role of resources. So some of us have more financial resources, social support, etc., making it easier for us to be resilient. If we don't have resources, if we're living in poverty and so forth, it's much harder. It doesn't mean that you can't do your very best to adapt to and hopefully even grow from a difficult situation.
So there's the context, and then there's the, you know, some, I talk to a lot of widows because we're talking to widows with this video, and they just feel like either they just have bad luck, or they've just never had the hand up, or, you know, they just feel in the context, their surroundings may have always been maybe toxic, right? And they're trying to rise above that situation. And now widowhood has almost, you know, created more hardship. So they might be thinking this is just genetic, like this is my family. We're not achievers. We're not optimistic people. Does that play into the science at all, that, or are all people able to actually rise above and overcome?
Yes, there is a genetic component, but genes are not destiny by any means.
Good.
Our personality traits are, as you know, partly determined by genetics, but there's a huge environmental component, developmental component, a learning component.
Mm-hmm.
So resilience can absolutely be learned. And really, you can think of it as a set of skills.
Yes.
And we'll talk about some of those skills. But that's one of the exciting parts about resilience, is that this is something you can learn.
Yeah. So what you're telling me is that every widow who's actually watching this video has a 100% chance, really, basically, to become more resilient, right?
Yeah. Yes, and the other thing to remember is that all of us are more resilient than we know.
Yes.
There's a wonderful author, Ann Maston, who is a researcher at University of Minnesota, and she talks about ordinary magic.
Okay.
The idea being that all of us are far more sturdy than we even know. Now, there are times when we don't feel that. There are times we feel depressed, anxious, as helpless, and so forth. But one of the keys in resilience, when you can, is to look inside and find that remarkable reservoir of strength that is there.
I love that ordinary magic. I mean, that is, who doesn't want that? So, and in your research, you actually have found, well, let me just put it this way, 25 years plus of research, you found, and you listed in your book, these 10 factors that strongly are associated with resilience. So what are those?
Okay, so those are positive emotions and optimism, which we recognize is extremely difficult when you're going through a painful situation like death of a loved one, and afterward as well. And that also includes humor, by the way. Emotion, what we call emotion regulation, learning to confront your fears. Because if you don't confront your fears, your life becomes very constricted and limited. And learning how to confront your fears is extremely important. And we may have some time to talk about that.
Yeah.
Coping style. Resilient people tend to be more active copers compared to passive copers. And we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Okay.
Social connectedness and social support is absolutely essential. Nobody does it alone. You may think we do, but we don't. Having some flexibility cognitively is important. Learning to accept that which I cannot change, and to take a difficult situation and to appraise it in as many ways as possible to see if there's even a sliver of an opportunity for growth. Also, spirituality and religion, we found, are not for everybody, but for most, actually, are very important in terms of helping us get through difficult times and giving us real strength.
Sorry.
That's right. Altruism is extremely important.
Mm.
And when you're in the midst of a tragedy, that may be next to impossible. But once you're beginning to get out of it, the more you can focus on helping others, it helps you tremendously. Another factor which I think is extremely important is finding resilient role models. So finding other widows, for example,
Right.
who have found ways to make it through and to grow, perhaps. And the Modern Widows Club is filled with such individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Purpose and meaning. Having a purpose and meaning and a mission makes all of us much sturdier, stronger, and improves the well-being of our life dramatically. And finally, learning how to recover. So learning how to deal with stress. We all have a lot of stress, but when someone who we love passes away, it's as stressful as anything that we can face in life. But we do have to learn how to decrease stress so that it's not chronic.
Well, when I first read the 10 components, what was interesting, because I got exposed to your book in 2015, and at that point I had been widowed for 15 years, and I thought, why had no one shared this information with me? Because it was like a blueprint in a lot of ways for me to look and see where I could become, well, I could see where I was becoming more resilient. And that was what I realized from that list was 8 of them I had already done. But the 2, imitating resilient role models and a social support, was what I needed desperately. And I had created Modern Widows Club out of that need. And so even though it didn't exist, I created it so that I would have it. And so now, of course, widows can plug into MWC, but at that moment, I just thought, somehow I knew that I needed those 2 things. And I was everything that you wrote was my experience. The things I was looking for, it took me 10 years to find truly widows who would mentor me. And I just thought, that's too long. Yeah. We need to engage in that really soon. And so, when you talk about the importance of social support, why it's so important for anyone, to be honest with you, I looked for so long that I just became one, because it was absence in the world of finding someone that inspired me who was widowed. And so talk a little bit about just the real importance of social support, because it's those 2 on that list, and plus all of the other ways we approach healthy widowhood. We're approaching all of those components. Yeah. The social support part, well, it was the very last thing that I needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that may be the most important one.
I did what I could up until that point.
What you could, and Modern Widows Club really, as I said, embodies all of these, really. Right. Because it's active coping, it's role models, it's social support, it's altruism, it's all of these. And the reason that social support is so important is because it is hardwired into our nervous system. Wow. We are social animals, and our ancestors, if they wandered away from their tribe, or they were rejected or extruded in any way, they probably died. And yeah. We have evolved in a way that the brain experiences, the brain and the body, and spiritually and psychologically, we experience loneliness and rejection as being extremely painful. And in fact, when we experience those, we activate the sympathetic nervous system, so the fight-flight response. So we're activating the same biological system that is activated when we're afraid and when there's a danger. So loneliness and isolation and rejection, they're activating those same fear circuits because, at least our ancestors, that would be death probably.
And then negative self-talk is just like what perpetuates that experience.
Yeah.
And when you get into a community that's like, oh, there's a different perspective, then that gets thrown into that dynamic, and it's not always so true because now you have alternative perspectives counterintuitive to it. I think that's what's so important with social support. And even for me, it was, there was at one point where I launched Modern Widows Club. I created it, but there was at one point last year when my father passed away that all of that support came to me. And so what I had created was now what I was relying on for support. And it took the pain away from that experience, exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
And we say all the time at MWC, we can talk about, what's the value of our organization. And I always say to reduce the amount of suffering that widows face. But it's hard to tell people that widows suffer in the first place because we live in a society that has empathy fatigue, that is lacking a lot of compassion. We've got, government and religious, and we've got all these systems that really, they have little patience for people who are in pain.
Yes.
And we're experiencing that on top of our negativity, our lack of ability to find social support. And so, yes, I've witnessed thousands of widows suffering go away and then turn into the altruism, the meaning and the purpose, like you're saying. And it's everything. It's really everything. And so when you were talking about active and passive coping, go into a little bit more of that so people even understand, because at MWC, you're actively coping, which people think is grieving more, but it's not. It's actually about growth. It's taking you out of distress and moving you over to eustress, which is negative stress to positive stress. Doesn't mean that you aren't going to be faced with things that you're fearful of or requires all of these resilience building components, but your trajectory is set in a different direction between active and passive coping. So talk a little bit about that. So
one thing I did want to say is that you're about this topic is you're absolutely right that being connected, I can't emphasize enough, just as you have said, how important it is to actively reach out for others. And the nice part about something like the Modern Widows Club is that the club helps you do that.
Exactly.
You join the club, and pretty soon you're surrounded by a group of loving, caring individuals who want to help and who find great solace and help in being connected. And one of the things that happens, so passive coping is denying that there's a problem. Gee, I really don't have a problem. That does not work in general. It's avoiding and withdrawing. And we see this all the time with depression and post-traumatic stress disorder and so forth. That does not work because you can never get over what it is you're in pain about, or it's much harder to get over it by avoiding it and not talking about it, sharing, having with people who you trust and who care for you, or at least yourself going through it and processing it. Substance use is a very common form of avoidance. We see it all the time, and that does not work. Two forms of passive avoidance passive coping that I love personally are repetitive negative venting. and blaming other people. I love to do this, but they don't work. They just don't work. So don't do them.
Love blaming other people for my problems.
Yeah. On the other hand, active coping is gathering information, learning from others. I mean, how do I get through this? How have they gotten through it? And problem solving and making decisions and seeking out social support. And as Carolyn was saying, cognitive reappraisal. Is there another way that I can think about the situation that I am now in? And when you're around like-minded individuals, they've thought about this a lot. So you can, you can listen to, be with individuals who are going to help you think about it in other ways, constructive ways, ways that can be meaningful to you, ways that can give in fact, in some cases, a new direction to your life. Not to minimize what you've been through.
Yeah,
that's always painful.
yeah.
But there are, and the other thing about social connectedness is that it tends to encourage active coping, because, as you said, when I have a group around me, I'm much more likely to take little risks that I might not otherwise, or to be a more active coper because I know somebody has my back. I know there are people who truly care about me. So, yeah.
That was when our conversation before this, leading up to it, we were talking about this moment where what I see happen with widows is they're either in the why me stage or the what now stage. And that literally is, why me is passive coping and what now is active coping. I realize that now. You put some terminology onto it that helped me. And I'll use an example. I had one of my ladies that I was mentoring, and she felt guilty because she didn't do enough for her husband, and she literally lived in that world. And so I challenged her to write a letter to her guilt and befriend it, and to fire it, basically, and to say, I have a new friend, and that friend's name is empowerment, and thank you for being there to protect me, but now I'm, in future moving forward with my empowerment friend, and it's more healthy for me. Everything I just told you was exactly what that is. And this is a woman who's older, and she doesn't realize she's in passive coping. Yes. And so she's actively writing this letter to free herself of this guilt of why that
right.
She will never have an answer to.
There will never be an answer to that. You're right. And we've talked to one of the writers that I most respect is Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor who wrote a wonderful book, Man's Search for Meaning, and many other books. And one of the things that he went through the Holocaust, and one of the things that he focused on, he lost his whole family. One of the things that he focused on was, or mentioned was, try your best to focus not only on what has been lost, but on what is left.
Yes.
And there usually is a lot left to be grateful for and to embrace.
You're right. And that was at year 6, believe it or not, I came to that realization. Yeah. I was on a TV show called Shalom in the Home with Rabbi Shmuley Boltek. And he, in the TV show, which got broadcast all over TLC, was you're in this stage of unacceptance. And I was working so hard to put a mask on for the world, but internally, I was so broken and lost and scared. And these were things that I didn't have there was no social media back then. This was in 2006. So when social media opened up, I saw, the ability to now finally find this community, and it was everything to be understood by someone who was raising kids, running a business, grieving, still in love with a man who wasn't alive anymore. I just didn't have anyone to have all of these conversations with. And so it was vital because, we talked a lot about this moment of acceptance. For me, it happened in a very public forum, and it truly was life-changing for me. I believe that for 6 years, my life was over. And I said that on video. And when I saw myself say that on a screen, I was just like, oh my gosh. I thought I had it so together, but I had to finally come to this acceptance moment of, I'm going to have to choose different for me and my family. And I'm going to actively work on that.
Yeah, I think we did talk about that, and I think that's critical. And it, as you said, it may take a while. It's not as if you can necessarily do this right away by any means. And the acceptance is actually often an active choice. Not always, but it's often an active choice. And it's not as if you are giving up your love or care for that person at all.
Right.
In fact, in some ways, it's just not that at all. And it's critical. I'll give an example, which is pretty extreme, but we've interviewed lots of prisoners of war from Vietnam. And one in particular comes to mind, wonderful gentleman who was tortured brutally. He was in solitary confinement for 2 years, and he really felt like he was going crazy.
Wow.
And one day he heard a voice. He thought it was coming from outside of his head, and it said, "This is your life." And at that moment, he realized, yes, this is my life. I am in this cell. I, by myself, cannot get out unless I'm rescued by, the Americans or something. But I am in this cell. I'm not going to change that. What area of freedom do I have in this situation? What area of choice do I have? Well, part of my choice eventually could be my attitude toward the hand that fate has dealt me. That's not easy, but hopefully there is some choice there. And for him, he started to exercise a lot. He started to communicate with the other prisoners through the wall, sort of a Morse code type. And he said it very much changed his life, his attitude, and so forth. But he could only do that when he began to accept the fact, this is where I am. Yeah. And I need to redirect the best I can some of the energy onto what next? How can I change? What area of freedom and choice do I have?
Even as minor as it was.
Even as, it was minor, but for him it was huge.
Right?
Yeah.
It changed the trajectory of everything going forward.
It did.
Even if he died, he was going to die actually in a better place mentally and physically.
Yeah. And spiritually for him.
And spiritually, for sure, of course. If you're in solitary isolation, what do you have except your mind and your soul and that connection? For me, I've had those moments where I've been laying on my bed. I clearly remember laying on my bed, looking at the ceiling, putting my daughters to bed, working all day, having to start another day of this life I didn't want, and going, no one knows, with tears just streaming down my side of my face. No one knows. And I'm in this room, in this house, on this property, in this neighborhood, in this city, in this state, in this country, on this whole globe. Literally no one knows the depth of my pain. And it was the loneliest feeling I had ever had. And I honestly believe that, having this I had been volunteering at a local grief center. I ended up being on the board there for 12 years. But they were the ones that referred me to be on this TV show. And if I had not been altruism, if I had not seeked meaning and purpose and serving others, I never would have had this experience that then all of a sudden exploded me into a world of people who cared that I had no idea. And so I caused something to happen because I decided to go and be there for others. And it took the attention off of my own pain because it was unbearable, to be quite honest with you. I think it comes to a point for a lot of people where there's like, I cannot stay in this amount of pain and I need to be honest with myself. And I think for me, that's where the acceptance came, and I had to face my own self, right? That's what he had to do. He had to face his own self.
Yes.
And he had become his own worst enemy.
Yes.
In that situation. And for us too, you know, in these worlds that no one sees, that are in our hearts and our minds. And so there, you know, that when we had the conversation about the connection between resilience building, acceptance, and the freedom of choice, the power of that, it's like a trifecta.
Yes. And it's very understandable, completely understandable, that would be hard to come by. It's hard to on your own.
Yes.
It's really hard. It took 6-10 years, you know, and that's not uncommon. And so and you mentioned feeling understood. When we talk about social connectedness and social support, there are many ways that I can receive social support, many types of support. I can receive emotional support. I can receive what's called instrumental support, like money or resources if I need it. Mm-hmm. I can receive informational support, such as advice. Mm-hmm. Or another very powerful form of support. In fact, one of my colleagues did a wonderful study of returning Iraq-Afghanistan veterans. And in many studies of traumatized people, social connectedness and support is one of, if not the strongest factors to help limit the amount of depression and PTSD. Anyway, one of the factor that he found was most strongly related to decreased depression and PTSD was feeling understood. And
something that simple.
Something that simple. and that's why support groups can be very effective. That's why veterans like to hang out with veterans, because you want to be understood.
Have you ever been asked to, like what we have asked you to do, and to research widows? Because it is, you know, according to the Holmes and Ray Social Readjustment Scale, the #1 most stressful event, just a life event, aside from war or, you know, that type of a situation. Obviously that's it, you know, but I'm just talking about a normal life. Losing a spouse is 100 stress units.
Yes.
So I'm curious why, like people in resilient science, researchers, have they ever researched women in widowhood or widowhood in general with people?
Not enough. You know what? As we're talking, I'm thinking about our field and wondering, why not? We need to do more.
Yeah, I've attempted to find those people, and I end up in a dead end road constantly, whether it's women's studies or sociology or resilient science and psychiatry, and we're not even recognized even by the medical industry hardly at all. And so it makes me curious, how are we going to help? We have 14 million widows in this country, and more now because of COVID.
Yes.
So when are we going to do this? Because it is it's like these indicators are here, but no one has showed up to prove it. And that's why we do surveys at NWSC, and that's why now we're working with mental health counselors and social workers. women who are actually in our industry, I mean, in our community. So
Yeah.
they already do this for a living. So they're widowed and they have this profession.
Yeah.
I think that's where it naturally probably grassroots starts.
Yeah.
But at another time, we're going to do more webinars on specific topics in the future.
Yeah.
I know that that's a big area that we can make a huge amount of progress. And so, that's why I'm so grateful for all of your, vote of confidence for what we're doing, but also correlating it with real research and science that is how validating it is for what we're doing.
And I think you're right. There's a lot of research on grief and
Yes.
and so forth, but in terms of resilience,
Yeah.
and let's say widows, boy, there needs to be a lot more done. And one of the reasons I am so drawn to the Modern Widows Club is because, as I said, you really embody all of the factors we're talking about. And in fact, this club is what we might call has a survivor mission. And that is survivor mission.
Okay.
And that is, I think, a very powerful way to adapt to tragedy. Examples might be Mothers Against Drunk Drivers.
Yes.
So out of their trauma and tragedy, they developed a very powerful social good.
Yes.
Which includes connecting with others. It includes altruism. It includes meaning and purpose, and so forth. And the modern, and just being a member. Oh, by the way, another thing we talked about is for anyone who is on the Zoom link, you're already doing active coping. You're already embracing, joining, also hopefully social connectedness. And I would encourage you to continue, because this organization is a resilience building organization.
Yeah, when people ask me if my little elevator speech is, oh, what does Modern Widows Club do? And I'm like, we empower widows to thrive. And if they're not compelled at all or interested or intrigued, they won't ask anything else. But they're like, how do you do that? Well, first I'm implying that widows don't feel empowered, right? And so I have to start there, that we have to educate people that widows don't exactly feel confident and empowered when they lose their spouse. It is a world of a tremendous amount of secondary losses that are just unknown to the world outside looking in. And so there's a lot of areas, there's being there for widows for all of these really powerful reasons, but then there also is educating society on the difference between the myths and the realities of really current widowhood. They're tremendous. And this is where the women in our community start feeling understood, because the majority of what we have learned is from listening to them.
Yes.
And then challenging them and then championing them to find the meaning and the purpose. I'm just one example of a woman who found meaning and purpose from a horrific loss of a spouse instantly in a car accident. And people, would often say, you just need to leave those widows alone and find your own life and forget about them. And I just thought, but I am them. Yeah. Asking me to forget about them would be asking me to forget about my own widowhood experience. And that's impossible. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that in your book, that is, it's the end of the book. I just wanted to read it from page 265, because everyone on this call is going to get this book. Because they're going to run out and buy it on Amazon. But one of on the chapter of meaning purpose and growth, which is everything we're about, it says, Frankl recommends that we search for meaning not by asking, what is the meaning of my life? But instead by asking, what is life asking of me? Not by asking, what can I expect from life? But rather, what does life expect from me? And then I highlighted, see, I'm a highlighter. What is life asking of me? Everything. Everything I've got. Or as Frankl put it, life is asking me to fill the space in which I happened to have landed. It says, what matters is what I do with what I have. There it is, right there.
That's it.
That's why your book was so powerful, because I went, wow, I am like a living example of this book from my last 20 years of my life. And it was very validating to read this and just go, okay, please don't make widows wait 20 years to come to this realization. Let's lessen that distance of struggle so they can get to the purpose and the meaning and the life that is waiting for them, and what life is, what their future life is waiting for them to come and take for themselves. And so it was very reassuring to me to go, wow, all the research and science, for me, it was an instant healing. Like I went from, I'm not broken anymore, to I put the pieces, I rebuilt my life and I put those pieces back together. And it was a proud, proud moment where I could not deny that the amount of work that I had done was, that saying, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm saying it's going to be worth it. And so that your book and all of this conversation is exactly the point of which I want all of our ladies to be at, right?
Yes. Yes.
Right. And it's possible. Now we've talked about it's possible. Literally, it's seeing is believing. So when you come into these social circles, when you're actively coping, when you're here, every little increment, every little communication, every little point of education, everything heard and felt, it matters.
Yes, and I agree with you, and perhaps as important as anything else is that no one does it alone.
Yes.
You really can't do it alone.
And for widows, there's no reason to anymore.
No.
Yep. No, and in talking to you about why don't people research? Well, the reason why most people didn't research is because they never had a research population. And so Modern Widows Club has eliminated that barrier. And so now we can open a door into studying, what do widows want this? And yeah. I think the answer is yes, because I think they're human. All humans want this.
Yes.
And so we find ourselves in this stage of widowhood that none of us chose, a club that no one wants to be in, and yet it's the healthiest direction that they can actually step towards.
Yes.
And so we're grateful and honored to have your knowledge backing up this organization, and just, coming alongside of us. The more people who care about widows, I think the better, because the next generation of widows, like possibly my daughters, I do want it to be different for them. Yeah. And we can make it different for them. And people like us and everyone who shows up at Widow Empowerment event, we're all a part of that collective movement to make things better. And I just want to thank you so much. If you have any closing thoughts, go ahead and share them now. And
well, I thank you very much. And I just encourage everyone on the Zoom and everyone who watches this to realize that there is meaning and purpose remaining, even though it may not feel as though there is at this moment. And there are many people who understand essentially, not exactly, but essentially what you're going through, and many people who want to help.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Steve Southwick. I really appreciate, and we'll be hearing more from you in the future, but we're just honored to have you a part of our 2020 virtual Widow Empowerment event.
It's my privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you.